what we're seeing at the State House, what we're anticipating is going to be occurring over the next few weeks, and then also into 2017. But before I begin, let me introduce Greater Ohio to you. So we are a statewide nonprofit with a mission to champion revitalization and sustainable growth throughout the state. And what that means in our day-to-day work is that we look to find and advocate for policies and practices that help Ohio's struggling communities stabilize and thrive. We are, as it says, primarily foundation-based, nonpartisan, bipartisan, so really having Ohio's communities first and foremost in our sights. The work that we do often falls into three subject areas. First, neighborhood stabilization and urban revitalization. For the last few years, this has taken the form most visibly in work that we've done around vacant properties, making sure that communities have the tools to eliminate blight and then also the tools to regrow on those vacant parcels. We also are interested in seeing our transportation and infrastructure systems modernized. Much of that, as you well know, was built around World War II or before. And while these systems have been very helpful in advancing Ohio in the economy nationally and beyond, they are starting to age, as Curtis pointed out, as well as also becoming a little out of step with 21st century needs. Most pressing, at least on our agenda these days, is making sure that there's funding, adequate funding for public transportation, and that work falls into this category, as well as also making sure that our communities around the state have the funds to help them upgrade their sewer and water systems. Akron, your CSO issue is top of our mind, as are many other communities who also are facing similar challenges. Last, we work on encouraging regional growth, regional governance. And I will say, in Northeast Ohio, you all get it, you all are practicing it. The rest of the state still has some things to learn from what you all are doing. And what I mean here is that local governments are collaborating. You think of yourselves as an economic region that can compete as a region on the national and international scale. And while, of course, I'm sure that there's probably a little bit of, job poaching, et cetera, going on, local government to local government, you all are working through those conversations in ways that the rest of the state could really also benefit from. So these are the areas that we work in. Again, really looking at both the policies that, state policies that support the advancement of these goals, as well as practices, emerging strategies that can really help communities get there. We do original research in our office, so a lot of data crunching, interviews, but we also work with communities on local projects, local strategic assistance projects. And this is an opportunity for us to understand what is going on the ground, understand what are some of the best practices, emerging strategies that we know about nationally, even nationally, that can be brought to bear to really sort of overcome whatever the local challenges. And then also identify, is there a state policy angle here that we could help this community and other communities suffering or facing those sorts of challenges overcome by talking to our policymakers at the State House. So combining with our original research, that sort of on the ground information that we gather through these projects that we do with you all, we then, as I said, advocate at the State House, the Governor's Office, the various agencies for different policies that are either going to help accelerate the work that you're doing, remove a barrier, or overcome a gap that currently exists. And I will talk in much more specific detail what exactly I mean by all of that. So, as I said, Curtis asked me to come and give a legislative update. So I'm going to first kind of give the context of the scene, talk about some key milestones that are coming up. With the election just a month away, which I think all of us are relieved to know that that's kind of, soon ahead of us. There is going to be some activity after the election, and I think you all should know what's going to be happening. Then I'll talk about what to expect in 2017 and 2018, really focusing on the first 6 months of 2017 when the state main operating budget is going to be debated and then eventually passed. And then also walk through some of the bills we're watching now, issues that we're expecting will get a lot of attention in the next year. So really trying to give you a heads up so that there aren't surprises, although there always are, just to give you a sense of what we think is going to be happening at the State House and the Governor's Office over the next 9 months or so. So please indulge me for just a moment on the Civics 101 class. So let me walk you through some of the just legal timelines and milestones. I'm calling them legal because, for example, the General Assembly, which is currently seated right now, is going to end By law, the governor must introduce his operating budget by January 31st. Again, by law, the transportation budget must be passed, signed by the governor by March 31st. And again, by law, June 30th is when the main operating budget needs to be signed. So these are sort of externally facing big milestones that I think the public, you all, we in the advocacy realm are keeping an eye on. But there's a lot else going on. So, and you'll have to excuse my graphics, which could probably benefit from the folks that AMATS is using. So we have the link-up period happening after the election. Folks, our legislators are going to go back, they're going to try to wrap up a lot of stuff because those folks who have lost their election are going to be out of a job December 31st, and new people will be coming in. So that few weeks between the 8th of November and Thanksgiving are going to be extremely busy at the State House, and then maybe a week or two after Thanksgiving. I'm going to talk about here in a minute what exactly we're going to see, but that generally is a very, very fast and furious time. A lot of decisions are being made, a lot of, if not deals, at least a lot of conversation is going on. And it's important to know like, what all the conversations are because they're going to be moving quickly. As I said, the General Assembly, a new General Assembly will be seated in January. The first few weeks it's very pro forma and very kind of focused on getting people sworn in, getting people assigned to committees, committee chairs assigned. But by mid-January, this General Assembly, General Assemblies are 2 years, this General Assembly is going to start getting down to business. And they're going to start doing hearings on various bills that are going to be coming their way. One of the biggest bills that they're going to be hearing immediately is the transportation budget. And those hearings are going to be occurring from about mid to late January through mid-March. And that's when the external facing testimony committee hearings are going to be occurring. During that time, again, the governor is going to introduce his main operating budget. And then again, those hearings are going to be going on through about early June. And you'll see that the hearings stop about 2 weeks before the bills are actually signed. At that point, they go to conference committee behind closed doors, which we at Greater Ohio can't access. If we were a high-powered lobbying firm, maybe we could access them. But that's really when sort of final decisions are made. There's a lot of sort of horse trading going on between the legislature and the governor's office, and then the final product basically gets revealed 24 hours before it has to be signed, more or less, and bam, then we have the bills. All of this is sort of external facing. Internally, or at least if not internally, what is going on right now is a lot at the State House. And so while these timelines are the ones that you feel like as you all know as local officials, bills and policy do not just come out fully formed immediately, right? So right now, through the beginning of January, advocates such as Greater Ohio and other transportation advocates are making meetings. We're working furiously to talk to the right folks to really get our issues in front of them, making sure that they know what we're going to be talking about publicly in testimony, but also trying to see if they could, listen to us, take our ideas, and incorporate those ideas in the budget to begin with. Same with the main operating budget, which is another bill that we are also trying to make sure that our policy needs and ideas are getting a space for. So again, we're meeting with folks. This is all happening behind the scenes. I mean, it's not nefarious, but it is, one-on-one meetings. It's really the most productive way, I think, to have your voice heard. I want to say, so first of all, these bills, the transportation bill and the main operating bill, at this point, are the primary vehicles that policy gets set today in Ohio. Standalone bills certainly can do that, but for the vast majority of the policy that gets written these days, it happens in these bills, which is why it's so important to start these conversations now and even in the summer, so that by the time it actually hits the floor at the State House, everybody sort of knows what's going on. Just to sort of put this in perspective, the last transportation bill, state transportation bill, which was in 2015, that bill was 261 pages upon passage. The main operating budget bill upon passage was 2,783 pages. So you can only have so many pages of saying this fund's going to pay for this activity, and then you have a lot of other sort of things that get swept into that. So we, again, we see those, of course, not as the only opportunity for local governments and advocates to really kind of see what they want policy-wise to happen, but this tends to be one of the best opportunities for communities to ask for more funding for public transportation, for example, to talk about how local government funding is flowing to municipalities. Those are the kinds of things that can also get discussed in these types of bills. And this is why conversations earlier on are happening before it actually happens, before there's an actual public testimony starting in 2017. So again, I apologize about the Civics 101 timeline sort of class here, but I think this advocacy timeline is the most important one and often the one that is not usually discussed. So that's helpful. This is all to say that you should be talking to your legislators right now because they're thinking about what they want to take to their caucus and then to the State House in 2017. And I'll talk about a little more different strategies, but again, I want to really emphasize that if you don't have a relationship with your legislators, make those happen, become a resource to them, tell them what your concerns are, tell them what you are worried about, tell them what the solutions are, because they want to know that information. That's their job to represent you down in Columbus. So let me walk through what we're seeing, what we're expecting to see in lame duck. And again, really, this time period, this 4 or 5 weeks after the election, before the end of the year, stuff's going to get wrapped up, but there's also a lot of kind of last-minute policy making going on. So those bills that are deemed high priority by the Republican caucus in both the House and Senate and the Democratic caucuses in the House and the Senate, those bills that are deemed high priority are going to be the ones that are pushed to the finish line, to the governor's office. Those bills may be getting hearings basically 3 days in a row, then they'll move to the other chamber. So if it's being heard in the House 3 days in a row, get passed out of the House 3 days in a row in the Senate, and then passed out of the Senate to the governor's office. We have seen this happen. It's kind of crazy when it does, but we do. There's also many bills that are sort of in the process of being heard, and so are likely to make it to the end. There are over 800 bills right now in play, so of course not all of them are going to be passed. This is really the highest priority ones that are going to actually make it. We'll also see a few bills introduced that might signal what's going to be coming up in 2017. And this is a way for the bill sponsor, the advocates that are working with the bill sponsor, to sort of set out some test balloons, see how people are reacting, how policymakers are reacting, but also to really start to educate around a key issue. So if it's increased funding for public transportation, for example, really sort of taking the temperature of the legislature. I will also say there will be some gratuitous hearings of bills that are definitely, they're dead on arrival, but are being introduced for a variety of reasons. The sponsor may have promised his cousins, brothers, whatever, that he would introduce a bill that really helps that one business. We also see really funny kind of bills about, puppy bills are not funny, but I mean, there's like these kinds of things that get introduced that are actually not a high priority. Really, puppy bills are not funny, but I'm just saying that these are not, it's not a high priority for the sponsor either. But for some reason, maybe it's building chips for the future, for example, the bill is getting introduced. So there was sort of around Cap Square kind of a funny conversation piece of what most outrageous bills get thrown in here at the end of the lame duck. So going back to my comment about there's a few bills that are high priority that will actually advance, and then these other bills that maybe are in process or very early in the process, but are still being, kind of tested by the legislators. These are the bills that we are watching. So first, House Bill 528 allows for local governments, local counties, to increase the motor license fees and to use that additional funds for bridge and road repair. I am not going to promise you that it's going to get passed, but I'm going to say that it'll probably have a hearing or two. I know that this is of keen interest to many of you in the room, and I would say that, again, this is really more of an educational opportunity for folks at the State House to really understand why this is a needed tool and where, to start to understand what the concerns are. I would not put money on it, but I would guess that if this does not pass in lame duck, that this language is going to try to be inserted into the transportation budget in 2017. Again, to that point about policy really happens in these budget bills. Another thing we're watching, another bill is Senate Bill 333, which is actually a bill that Ohio EPA is behind. It's really their bill, and they've asked a legislator to sponsor it. The bill primarily deals with solid waste and components of that, but there's an element about sewer and water systems and requiring asset management of those systems. The bill at the moment does not include any funding for those asset management activities, which we at Greater Ohio think would be great. We want to see robust asset management, but without the funding to sort of help communities understand how to do this, we're not quite sure what the results are going to be. Because this is an agency bill, a bill from Ohio EPA, there is a likelihood that it could pass, but there also, in that 4 or 5 week period in lame duck, there's opportunity to really sort of tweak it. So that's one of the tweaks that we at Greater Ohio are hoping to see, that addition of funding to actually help communities do asset management correctly. We are also monitoring House Bill 482. This bill, we like at Greater Ohio because it is really a great tool for communities that want to do redevelopment. So the bill clarifies when tax abatements would start on a brownfield project, and also clarifies when tax abatements would start on a development project in a community reinvestment. This bill, again, like I said, we like it because it's a redevelopment bill. It's fairly non-controversial. It doesn't like new development or redevelopment, so we expect that it may move forward, especially because the sponsor of this bill is very energetic, he's very persuasive, and has a lot of respect from his colleagues. House Bill 463, and I apologize when I threw House Bill all these numbers for the 5 people who are really wonky and like this stuff. I'm glad you're listening. The rest of you, thank you for indulging me. So 463, some of you may know this bill. It was a hot topic earlier this spring. It has to do with establishing a process for fast-tracking mortgage foreclosure on blighted property. That bill passed in June, and it just went into effect last week. This bill, basically a lot of the information and sort of policy that was being developed in this bill was at the very last minute, went into another bill, got to the governor's desk. So this remains a shell that is, that could be carried to the governor's office through the lame duck period. And so we're anticipating, for example, the information that's in 482 to be put into this shell, as well as some other policy recommendations or policy, and then carried to the governor's office. Additionally, there's some cleanup that has to happen to that fast-track foreclosure process, and so that bill would do that. Last, and I want to say that the information on the slide is not exactly right, so don't quote the slide about substitute Senate Bill 320. So, as many of you probably know, clean energy standards for utility companies were frozen several years ago. That freeze is supposed to expire at the end of this year, but there is interest among some legislators of extending that freeze out several more years. The clean energy industry, other advocates of alternative energy don't want to see that freeze continue, obviously. So the substitute bill now wants to, so first there was a bill that would extend the freeze to 2019 or 2020. Now legislators are saying, we'll make the standards voluntary until 2020, so sort of a backing off. So it would end the freeze hypothetically by making compliance with these standards voluntary and not compulsory, which, okay, is a step in the right direction. This is highly controversial, as you can only imagine, as I'm like talking through the ins and outs of this. So we are monitoring this. Greater Ohio itself, we at Greater Ohio don't do a whole lot of energy policy on the direction of our board several years ago. We decided not to get into that realm, but we do watch this because it has implications for many other things, including the great work that's going on down in Stark County with their CNG buses, for example. So again, This is probably going to be a hot topic moving into 2017, so understanding sort of what the response is right now through the lame duck period helps us sort of understand where people's thinking is on the legislature moving forward. Last, I just want to say that the House Democrats, it has been rumored that they are going to outline a lame duck policy strategy that includes increased spending on infrastructure, clean energy, and a number of other high priorities. Democrats are in the super minority right now and are expected to probably stay in that position. So it's great that they're going to raise this agenda. This is really much more, as I was saying earlier, about sort of educating, raising awareness around issues, but there's no expectation that the policy agenda would actually move forward in any substantial kind of way. And we're watching it just to sort of see how strongly the opposition is and if it's going to be opposed on party lines or if it's really about the content. So as I was trying to point out here, there's a lot of stuff that's happening right now, but a lot of this also is going to be moving forward into the next General Assembly. So I'm going to talk very briefly about that, and then I want to add, a little more of the questions, because I know I'm running through a lot here. So what to expect starting in 2017? This will be Governor Kasich's final budget, and every budget that he has put forward has had several signature issues. We are not expecting anything different this time. Additionally, the assumption around cap square is that he's continuing to keep his eye on a presidential bid in 2020 and may use this as a platform to sort of raise those key issues that he would want to see discussed at the national level. So he's a quirky guy to begin with. We're not expecting anything less but quirkiness with this final budget as well. Next, we are seeing and anticipating that the Republicans are going to lose a few seats in the House and 1 and 2 in the Senate. And again, the Republicans in both chambers hold supermajorities, and even with the loss of those seats, the Republicans are still, by a wide margin, going to continue to hold kind of a position of strength. The loss of these Republicans in these competitive districts, these are these districts that are competitive and in fact generally tend to trend Democratic but are currently being held by Republicans. Those Republicans who are expected to lose those seats, most often moderate Republicans. And so those moderate Republicans, when they are taken out of the mix because the seat might go back to being Democratic, means that on the whole, the caucus is likely to turn even more rightward than it is currently, with more cultural and fiscal conservatives taking a stronger voice in the caucuses. The House Speaker and the presumed Senate President are conservative but not as right-wing as some of their colleagues. And so they're going to want to work with the governor on most of his signature issues, all but most of them. And additionally, they may work with Democrats on a much more bipartisan basis than we've been seeing the last few years. This is going to be very much kind of on a case-by-case, issue-by-issue basis. And this does not mean necessarily that the Democrats now suddenly have a significant influence or pull at the State House, unfortunately. But what this does mean is that there's going to be a little more tension within the caucuses, or at least we're anticipating that may be occurring, and that there's opportunities for advocates to really sort of take advantage of that tension, but also it's going to just get sort of complicated as you line up who your champions are and your supporters are, and who you know is going to be opposed, and sort of how you get that right mix for passage. So here are the things that we're hearing around the State House as being high priorities moving into 2017. So first, earlier this year, the federal government said to Ohio, you can't charge sales tax on our managed care organizations anymore. And these are the folks that sort of are intermediaries with Medicaid, Medicare. And so the state is now not going to be able to collect sales tax on those activities, and we're looking at a $1.1 billion shortfall. This is going to be carried disproportionately by counties which, sales tax is one of their primary revenue sources, and also the 8 counties that fund their transit agencies with a portion of that sales tax. This is a huge issue. There are a lot of conversations going on right now in Columbus. How are we going to fix this? Last I heard, honestly, the governor's people are still sort of throwing stuff on the wall to see what sticks. So nobody has a good solution. So if you have a solution, we want to hear it, because as far as I know, nobody has figured out how to come up with $1.1 billion. Another issue that we think is going to be sort of part of Governor Kasich's signature issues moving through his final budget is the reduction or elimination of the income tax rate. So from the very first day of his governorship, he has wanted to eliminate the income tax. He has over the years been able to reduce it. The expectation is that he's going to want to reduce it again. So folks are getting kind of lined up to, take positions in defense and offense on that. Again, another long-standing issue for Governor Kasich, which looks like a solution for these other two issues, right? The reduction of the income tax as well as the elimination of the sales tax, is to increase the severance tax. So that's the shale gas tax. Governor Kasich has not been successful on this front ever, and I don't necessarily see that happening, coming to a successful end in this budget either. But again, the expectation is that we're going to continue spending at the same rate as a state. So how are we going to make sure that those debts are being paid, and that is one source that seems undertapped, at least from the governor's perspective. Water quality. Governor, as well as legislators, do not want another Sebring, another Toledo, and they certainly do not want a Flint in Ohio. Given the conditions of our sewer and water pipes and infrastructure, certainly the possibilities there that we're going to have some sort of water quality or water issue. So this is a high priority. Again, that EPA bill that's moving right now is going to link up. Whatever doesn't happen there is likely to be front and foremost in 2017. And then last, this clean energy standards issue continues to be contentious. Governor wants resolution. Some legislators want resolution. Some want to go differently. This is going to continue to be likely high priority. So this is what we're sort of hearing today. Again, don't take this as gospel. We do not have crystal balls. But this is sort of what we're hearing and the chatter on the street. This does not mean that these are the only things that are happening, because again, when you have 2,000 plus page long documents, you can do lots of other things in them too. So we at Greater Ohio are pushing for several issues. I'm only going to talk about a few today, again, because I want to be really cognizant about making sure there's time for question and answer. But I want to let you know where we stand, what we're trying to see happen. So first, we have long been a proponent of increasing funding for public transportation. Ohio is the second most urban state in the nation, behind California, tied with Florida. We are an urban state with very rural areas, and our public transportation system is not at all equipped for the needs that our current residents have. So we want to see increased funding from ODOT. You guys are great. You can take this message back to Dr. Ray, perhaps, that we would like to see increased funding through additional flexing of federal highway dollars away from highway expansion to public transportation, or a disbursement out of the general revenue fund, or the creation of a dedicated funding source. So we are agnostic on how that money gets generated, just that we think that a state contribution of $8 million a year is inadequate for what our public transportation systems need. Tied into this, as I mentioned, was that managed care organization sales tax issue because of how it impacts counties, and then those counties that are taking sales tax for transit. So this is going to be a complicated issue, but we think we have some ideas of Greater Ohio. We think we know that there's others that are floating around, particularly in Northeast Ohio. And I think, again, sort of educating on this issue is the first step to actually winning some successes. We also want to see reforms to water quality standards. So again, this issue about quality asset management, making sure that communities have the resources to manage the great infrastructure that has helped our communities build up, thrive, and also are going to be the foundations and the backbone for where we need to be going in the future. Many of our communities, particularly our smaller ones and rural ones, don't even know exactly what they have on the ground, much less foundation and those pipes, for example. And it seems like a lot of economic development opportunities are going to be missed if we cannot say, we have great working systems, we want you to come. We know that increasingly that there are businesses from the coast, particularly the West Coast, that are looking to Ohio because of the abundance of water that is here. And we want to make sure that our communities are prepared to meet that demand and really leverage that opportunity. Second, Because some of our communities are shrinking, many of our communities are shrinking, the ratepayers, that number of ratepayers is also shrinking. We also know that in many places, those ratepayers are getting older and they may be getting poorer. And so, as we have these aging infrastructure needs that are increasingly requiring money resources, ratepayers are not in a position to pay for a whole new sewer system, for example. So, are there ways to really generate cost savings, collaboration, regionalization, particularly among our smaller systems, seems like the way to go. And what we're suggesting in Greater Ohio is really much more back office combinations and collaboration, maybe some system sharing, but really trying to find those ways to help our smaller communities and our smaller systems stay sustainable in the long term. And then, of course, kind of a long-standing issue concerning Greater Ohio, urban revitalization. We are doing a great job across the state, Akron and Northeast Ohio, really post-childhood revitalization and regrowth, but we also know that there's a long way to go. And so we know that there are policies that can help our communities continue on that fast path to redevelopment. So mitigating blight, really, as I was mentioning, creating the market conditions where developers and the private sector want to move in and utilize this land that's now available. We think that more can be done on that front. Next, funding for the rehabilitation of residential properties. This is an issue, actually a federal issue, but we really need state support on it. And we think that we've done a great job managing blight through demolition. We also know that right now many communities have a large number of houses that really could be demolished or rehab. They just have a little more money for rehab. So we really want to turn toward that regrowth model. Brownfields. We have 10,000 brownfield sites in the state still. And while we have some really great state programs right now that are doing great work on remediation, we also know that with 10,000 sites, that we need flexibility and we need to be able to really make sure that we have all the tools in the toolbox to address those sites. And currently the state programs that are in place are kind of targeted to really specific niches. So we'd like to see brownfield funding. Again, this is something that seems like a no-brainer, but when you start to ask for lots of money, which brownfield remediation does need, this conversation gets a little sticky. And then last, this is a really small issue, but I think one that could have some really great returns. So the forfeited land sales that occur after properties fail at the second sheriff sale, they get forfeited to the state. And then counties will sell them off in bulk to real estate investors, many of whom are not the most trustworthy of folks, not all of them, but some of them. And that's where you really get this churning of blighted properties, where you'll have folks from out of the country buying properties in bulk, trying to squeeze rent for 2 more years out of the folks who they might be renting to. They don't pay their taxes, the properties go back into the system. And this is really, when we now see these blighted vacant properties around Ohio, these tend to be these properties at this point. The ones that your local governments, as you all know, can't actually access right now because they are being held by someone who is not only up to date on their taxes or haven't really hit that period yet when you will be able to get the property. So let me just end by reiterating some comments I was making earlier, which is how to raise the concerns that you have, the solutions that you are seeing for your community challenges. How can you take that information, make sure that it's being heard at the State House? So again, talk to your state senators, your state representatives now on a regular basis. They want you as a resource. Many of them have these very funny shaped districts, as you all know, and they don't know every corner of the region. You can provide that information to them. Also, they may not know what's going on in your particular community, but once they hear it from you and someone else and another person, they realize this is a really big concern. So make sure you're talking to your legislators. Come to Columbus, testify in hearings. So while that advocacy timeline that I showed you seems like a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff going on right now, that is not the only time period for change to happen in policy. Greater Ohio, a lot of folks here in the room, I think, have been successful in giving some really compelling testimony in a hearing, and then the next version of the bill includes that ask. So it can be done. Coming to Columbus is very legislators will listen to me, they'll listen to you much more closely and seriously because you are on the ground talking about real life examples. Talk to your professional membership organizations, the municipal league, county commissioners association, etc. Make sure they know what your concerns are, support them in the work that they're doing because they are the ones with the relationships with a lot of different legislators, not just your particular local one. They're the ones who can build these really interesting coalitions of legislators to get something moving. They're the ones who are really around the front line. So make sure you're talking with them. Another strategy that we see happen at the State House that can be very successful is when cross-state coalitions around shared concerns move forward. So while you might be having an issue and you feel like it's a very localized issue, once you find out, oh, Dean is also struggling with whatever, again, like public transportation funding, for example, and you start to build this concern so that you can see that suddenly this is a statewide problem, not just a really localized problem. And coming to the State House, coming to your legislators and saying, look, all of us have this concern, we want solutions, can be very, very compelling. And then last, I would just say, I've been doing this for about 6 years now, and I would say that it's a tough environment, and that partial wins are better than total losses, and that, ultimatums feel great, they very rarely actually get achieved. So being flexible, realistic, very pragmatic about what you want to achieve, and being not content, but really recognizing that this is an incremental process and that partial wins help you get that much closer to the ultimate goal. Maybe, but at least we are finding at Greater Ohio, probably the best strategy. So with that, let me invite you to join us in March down in Columbus. Greater Ohio Policy Center has a biannual summit, so every other year, where we talk about many of these issues. We also talk about policy, practices and strategies that we're seeing that are really sort of best practice. I think the Barberton panel here in a minute is going to be a great example. I invite you guys to come speak to panelists, who knows? So we really try to make sure that there's a convening every other year for really good ideas to be brought together and conversations to be had. So with that, let me open up the floor for comments, questions. I'd love some feedback if this is making sense. So yes, but then again, thank you so much for having me here. Really appreciate it.